Welcome to my very first Iceberg ranking video, purely focused on disturbing movies. I love disturbing and extreme cinema, and I love icebergs, so I decided to create my very own iceberg dedicated to disturbing films. I have watched quite the handful of disturbing films, ranging from New French Extremity, 70s and 80s exploitation, subversive drama, and so much more. Some of these entries are films that I know and love, whereas some push my personal boundaries when it comes to disturbing cinema, even being a few entries that I straight up refuse to watch. I've found that many disturbing icebergs just go from 0 to 100 way too quickly, so I did my best to make this one much more gradual so that it's actually fair to those who want to attempt to complete this. It starts with much more accessible horrors, thrillers and dramas that you've likely heard of and are even available on popular streaming platforms, but it slowly descends into the depths of hell, into territory in which I can almost guarantee you that you will not be able to find these films without doing some crazy digging. So let's just get straight into it, and of course there is a warning for some spoilers, but unfortunately that is somewhat necessary for me to actually explain to you guys why these films are actually disturbing. These are the films that we are going to be talking about. Yeah, they're pretty crazy. Some of the films on the super deep tiers I can almost guarantee that you've never seen anyone talk about before. Almost guarantee. I can't 100% guarantee it. I tried to pick both recommendations that I've never seen before, and my god, do I regret watching some of these, let me tell you. And another warning, I am going to be spoiling quite a few of these films, so it's up to you whether or not you'd like to skip me talking about certain movies for the sake of spoilers. I really do want you to be able to enjoy, if that's the right word, some of these films without me spoiling too much for you, because I believe that many of these films are worth checking out just like knowing nothing about them prior, because that's kind of how they're meant to get you, right? That's what makes them disturbing a lot of the time. Enough talking, let's start with its first two tiers. The Innocents. The Innocents is a horror movie directed by Jack Clayton, which uses psychological elements to disturb the viewer. It follows Miss Giddens, played by Deborah Kerr, a governess who is hired to look after two children in a Victorian mansion. However, she begins to become disturbed by the children's strange behaviours and becomes convinced that they are possessed. Housemaid Miss Rose tries her best to convince Miss Giddens that she is simply imagining things. The film is disturbing because it subverts the childlike innocence that you'd expect from children of this age, especially from Miles, as he becomes increasingly manipulative towards Miss Giddens. Even so, Miss Giddens makes it clear that these children are still her #1 priority, despite how much grief they cause her. Of course, just makes the cruel ways in which they act towards her all the more upsetting to watch. It has often been noted that supernatural elements of the film are reflections of Miss Giddens' sexual oppression. Was a fairly controversial and taboo theme for the 1960s, especially considering the fact that the film's supernatural elements have direct association with the young children in the narrative. As well as this, the fact that the children are possessed by adults adds a layer of uncomfortableness for the viewer, as the ways in which the children speak and act doesn't reflect their physical appearances, and Miss Giddens even kisses Miles on the lips at the end of the film. Fun fact, the song The Infant Kiss by Kate Bush was actually inspired by this film, as well as director Guillermo del Toro, using the film as inspiration for Crimson Peak. For these reasons, The Innocents has gone down in history as one of the greatest ghost stories of all time, which is sure to make you shiver. If you thought that the twins from The Shining were bad, then just wait until you see these guys, because I promise you that they are on another level. Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary is a horror film directed by Mary Lambert, in which a family moves into a new home, but strange things begin to occur after the family cat dies and is buried in an ancient burial ground. This film is often considered as disturbing because it includes a scene of pretty horrific child death, in which a toddler is hit and killed by a truck and is then later dug up from his grave by his own father, and we fully see his rotting corpse, as well as it becoming reanimated afterwards and being incredibly violent. The themes of grief in this film are incredibly prevalent and of course disturbing, creating an utterly bleak and unsettling atmosphere. As well as this, the mother Rachel has a dead sister named Zelda who haunts her, and she is utterly terrifying. One particular scene, she walks right up to the camera and it is pure nightmare fuel. The character of Zelda is also played by a male actor, which only adds to her unusual appearance, especially when considering that I'm pretty sure she was meant to be a teenage girl, but she looks much older and just generally creepy. The film is of course based on Stephen King's novel, which was actually inspired by King's own horrific experience, in which his daughter's cat was killed on a highway, and then his own young child very nearly suffered from the same fate. The film is pretty divisive, but I have to say that I actually quite enjoy this one, even if it is pretty goofy and strange. It also has some pretty notable actors such as Dale Midkiff and Fred Gwynne, so there's that. Also, any Ice Nine Kills fans here? Paranoid Park. If you're looking for a nice, nostalgic, coming-of-age film to bring you back to skateboarding as a teen, then maybe look elsewhere, because this film has some dark secrets that go way beyond just skateboarding. Paranoid Park, directed by Gus Van Sant, is a crime film which is sure to keep your jaw clenched with anticipation, as it follows a carefree teenage boy named Alex who is in the skateboarding community. However, a detrimentally life-changing event happens to him and we get to see the aftermath. As I mentioned before, the film is directed by Gus Van Sant, and it is filmed in a very social realist kind of style, with some surrealist elements, including a non-linear narrative, which makes the film's overall style quite unique, and it makes the atmosphere even more uncomfortable to sit through, as you as a viewer are essentially tasked to piece together the narrative of the film as you watch. The film takes a dark turn when Alex accidentally kills a railroad security guard whilst riding a train transporting cargo, as Alex hits the guard with a skateboard, knocking him onto the tracks, and, well, I guess you can kind of figure out what happens next. This man does not just face a quick death though. As a consequence of him being pushed onto this track by Alex, he is sliced in half by an oncoming train. Throughout the film, Alex is questioned by the police whilst at school. However, he keeps the incident to himself, and we are left to feel Alex's guilt as it eats away at him in this incredibly bleak film. At one point, we actually get a flashback back to the point at which Alex killed the security guard, and we see the horrific moment in which he is cut in half, and it is incredibly gruesome, and he even appears to still be alive, which only adds to the disturbing nature of the scene. The actors are also non-professional, which makes this film much more realistic. Because this film is directed by Gus Van Sant, it's kind of his typical auteur style to make the viewer feel like a fly on the wall for our protagonist's life, and it is no exception for this film. This would probably be a great gateway film for someone who is younger and wanting to get into disturbing or weird movies. We're saying that it is rated 16+. If you're over 16 and we're looking to get into these kind of films, and in my opinion this is a brilliant place to start. The film is also great if you're into 2000s nostalgia, because all of the characters wear such cool and authentic outfits, and they're of course dressed in skater inspired clothing, which is pretty cool if you're interested in that. It is quite a slow film, and it has lots of VHS skating clips kind of spliced into the film at points. But yeah, the most disturbing aspect of this film is probably Alex's entire reaction to accidentally killing someone. He kind of just keeps on skating and he doesn't seem to care much. At the same time, we can kind of sense his inner guilt, if that makes sense. Also, if you like Elliott Smith, then definitely give this one a watch, because something tells me that you might like the soundtrack for this one. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper, is a horror film which follows a group of friends who run out of gas whilst driving to their grandfather's house, and are subsequently tormented and brutally murdered by a family of deranged murderers, of course, including Leatherface, who famously hunts and kills them using a chainsaw. Perhaps to some, this film may seem outdated, but trust me that at the time of its release, it was highly controversial and mentally scarred thousands of people. This film is unique because, unlike most horrors, it is filmed in daylight, and as well as this, none of the murders are actually shown on camera, and instead they are merely implied. Despite this, it was still incredibly controversial and seen as too extreme, resulting in it being banned in over 10 countries, purely because of its nightmarish and relentlessly violent tone, rather than for any actual on-screen gore, making it a highly sought-after video nasty in the UK. The film is notably controversial because of its violence towards women, as it's been argued by various critics that it overtly is the gruesome of the female characters in comparison to the death of the male characters in the film. The film was actually filmed during a heat wave in Texas, and for the iconic dinner scene, real rotting animal carcasses and real bones were used, which of course made for an extremely disgusting and nauseating environment, as the heat made the stench almost unbearable for both the actors and the crew on set, with some actors even having to straight up leave the scenes because they felt that ill. Actors, maybe possibly crew as well, were throwing up between takes, so it just really adds to the already pretty repugnant and unsettling atmosphere of the infamous dinner scene. The psychotic laughter at the end of the film is sure to stick with you for a good while, as well as the guttural screams from Sally as she meets her untimely fate. This film is without a doubt horror classic, with one of the most authentic feeling atmospheres to ever be captured on camera. Leatherface is iconic for a reason, and will likely be one of the most infamous horror villains to ever exist. Could definitely be a fun one to watch if you have a weird, freaky little group of friends. It will definitely have you screaming at the TV multiple times throughout the film as you watch the characters making those classic dumb and frustrating mistakes. Jackass the movie. Now, I know what you're thinking, how and why is Jackass even on this list at all? Well, to that I say that Jackass is quite literally the most mainstream example of a compilation film that at its core just consists of people harming themselves, pulling dangerous stunts, and even just doing pointlessly disgusting things for the viewer's entertainment. Directed by Jeff Tremaine, this is a comedy film that stars Johnny Knoxville and his friends, and it features stunts such as Steve-O snorting wasabi mixed with soy sauce, Bam Margera planting a live alligator in his mother's kitchen, Erin McGahey eating a snow cone which he made from his own urine, Dave England defecating in a display toilet in a hardware store, and even a toy car being inserted into Ryan Dunn's anus and then later being defecated back out. Perhaps one of the most infamous stunts is the paper cut one, in which Ryan Dunn repeatedly slices the webbing between Johnny Knoxville's fingers and toes before Steve-O is then sliced on his tongue. In fact, I'm pretty sure that this scene was even included in very early parts of the Run the Gauntlet internet challenge, which contained progressively more shocking and gruesome clips as you watch. The film spawned several sequels despite receiving controversial reviews from critics upon its release. Fish Tank. Fish Tank is a drama film directed by Andrea Arnold, centering around a teenage girl named Mia who comes from a dysfunctional and neglectful family. It's filmed in a social realist style, which complements the coming-of-age genre of the film, as it makes it have a much more realistic and relatable tone. Mia is incredibly socially isolated. When her mother gets a new boyfriend named Connor, Mia quickly forms a very close relationship with him, as she enjoys the attention that he gives to her. However, interactions become increasingly flirtatious, and Mia begins to be jealous towards the relationship that her mother has with Connor. Of course, the age gap and the imbalance of power between Mia and Connor is incredibly uncomfortable to watch, and the film does not shy away from long, uncomfortable scenes, with the worst one being when her mother is passed out upstairs, leaving Mia and Connor alone on the sofa in the living room when they've both clearly been drinking, and Connor proceeds to take advantage of Mia and essays her before telling her to keep it a secret. Mia's actress was non-professional, which makes her performance feel much more raw and authentic, and the casting director for the film actually met her when she was having an argument with her boyfriend at a train station, and they decided to offer her the role for the film, which I just find so crazy, to be honest. Okay, that was everything on the first tier, so we're going to be moving down to the second tier now. The House That Jack Built. The House That Jack Built is a horror film directed by Lars von Trier, which follows Jack, a psychopathic serial killer who recounts his murder to us. The film is incredibly sadistic, as we basically relive each murder through Jack's perspective, and each death is incredibly graphic, including drawn out scenes and scenes in which he even murders very young children, and goes on to their bodies afterwards. As well as this, Jack then creates what he considers to be works of art of the bodies. The film has a very strange and conflicting tone though, as it kind of plays out like a satirical comedy at times. It really does not shy away from child death though, which makes this film super unsettling, as well as the fact that Jack is very meticulous and methodical about the ways in which he commits these murders, as he has OCD and wants each kill to be perfectly played out. It's actually reported that over 100 of the audience members walked out at Cannes Film Festival. So whilst I'd say that this film is still pretty surface level and like tame compared to the rest of the films lower down, it's definitely still extreme, like a lot of people, because it's just so graphic. It is very in your face with its And if you're not so familiar with the extreme side of horror, this one will probably be pretty shocking to you, I'm not gonna lie. Also, the film contains some pretty gnarly on-screen scenes of animal abuse, in which a young Jack cuts off the leg of a duckling. However, with all that being said, the film is directed by Lars von Trier, and it is pretty tastefully done, even if the content does sound pretty extreme on paper. So if you're familiar with von Trier's work, then you'll know that it's often very surrealist, and I'd argue it makes scenes such as these like less horrific to sit through, in my opinion. Matt Dillon is super convincing, a psychopathic serial killer in this film, and he definitely pairs very seamlessly with Lars von Trier's directing style. Although, saying that, Lars von Trier's signature auteur style is definitely dialed back slightly in this film. Some people even noting that it almost comes across as his own strange apology how controversial his previous works were. But then also, this film was still super controversial, so if this was von Trier dialed back, then I can only imagine what else he could have packed into here. And honestly, I really wish he had. Like, we know that von Trier can get pretty crazy with his work, even though he's fairly mainstream. And we've got a few entries on here that are directed by him, including Antichrist later on. So like, we know that he has the potential to do some crazy shit. Like, for such a mainstream director, he is definitely not afraid to push all sorts of boundaries. Also, spoiler, but this scene went pretty viral, so you've probably seen it. Anyways, Jack does indeed build a house, but not in the way you typically expect. No, this is not just any old house built from bricks. It's instead comprised of his victims. Many consider this to be one of the most disturbing movies of all time, which, like, if you're not used to extreme horror or disturbing media, then maybe start with one of the earlier entries before diving headfirst into this one. That being said, if you enjoy tense build-ups, uncomfortable slow burns, Matt Dillon, or any of Lars von Trier's other works, then definitely check this one out if you're feeling brave. Tyrannosaur. Yeah, don't expect a dinosaur film going into this one, because Tyrannosaur is a brutal, devastating British drama film directed by Paddy Considine, which centres over the characters of Joseph, a widowed man whose life is filled with uncontrollable rage and despair. And the film opens with a pretty horrific scene of animal violence as he brutally kills his own dog in a fit of drunken rage. He's clearly a very troubled man, as he's constantly picking fights with those around him, and he just has no respect for anyone. We see Joseph as he assaults a group of men in a pub after becoming aggravated by their loud bantering, and after this violent assault he finds himself hiding within a charity shop, where he subsequently meets a woman named Hannah, who's played by Olivia Colman, who you're likely to be familiar with if you're British, as she stars in quite a lot of films here. Despite the film being incredibly bleak, it's a gorgeous piece of cinema nonetheless, and Olivia Colman's performance is like no other in Tyrannosaur. She plays a Christian woman who tries her best to help and understand Joseph despite his violent and troubled nature, even after Joseph calls her some pretty belittling things as he struggles to understand her faith in God after she repeatedly tells Joseph that she'll pray for him. At a first glance, Hannah and Joseph seem like polar opposite characters. Hannah is a polite and caring woman who only wishes the best for Joseph, whilst Joseph is, well, the opposite. Joseph is just meaninglessly mean towards Hannah, but it's quickly revealed that Hannah has her own dark secrets. Who would have thought? Hannah's husband, James, who is played by Eddie Marsan, is incredibly abusive and manipulative towards her. We see James urinating on Hannah as she sleeps and acting as if nothing happened the morning after, as well as becoming just extremely toxic and controlling too, as he sees Hannah and Joseph together and he accuses her of cheating just out of nowhere. Like, that's the first thing he goes for: you're cheating, because he sees her fitting a tie for him when he visits her at work. All of this leads to a scene of pure cruelty and utter bleakness, which we see James violently S.A. Hannah. After this, Hannah leaves James, and this is when Hannah and Joseph form an incredibly close friendship, as she decides to stay with him for a short period of time until she can find somewhere safe away from James. However, this is unfortunately not where the disturbing nature of this film ends, as it turns out that Hannah actually had more dark secrets than we thought. Overall, it's a story about love and loss and how it can affect people in many ways. The reason as to why the film is actually named Tyrannosaur Tyrannosaur is because it was the nickname that Joseph gave to his wife because her loud footsteps reminded him of a dinosaur. Yeah, very questionable, and Joseph has actually acknowledged that this was questionable, so there's that, I guess. I'm actually going to give spoiler warning for this part, so skip ahead if you prefer not to hear this part, as I'd encourage you go to watch this film for yourself if dark, disturbing British dramas such as this interest you. It is a genuinely very well made film with some incredible actors in it, so now is your chance to skip ahead and watch this film for yourself if you'd like. Okay, spoiler time. So Joseph actually goes to confront James and he enters Hannah's home after taking her keys, only to find James dead, rotting corpse in the bedroom, ultimately revealing that Hannah had actually James after the assault. And when Joseph confronts Hannah on this, she reveals that this assault and abuse had been an ongoing issue for years. This includes her infertility being a direct result of the abuse, as James had actually essayed her with glass. Hannah then ends up in prison, and the film concludes with Joseph beheading his neighbour's dog with a machete after it mauled their 6-year-old son. Overall, this film is incredibly bleak and disturbing, but it's undeniable that the performances are great from everyone around, and despite its fairly short runtime of just 90 minutes, it is an unforgettable film which explores the haunting yet realistic consequences of domestic abuse. Exhibit A. Exhibit A is not your typical found footage horror film. This film is directed by Dom Rotherow. Instead of incorporating ghosts or monsters, it instead focuses on a young girl named Judith who films her seemingly ordinary everyday life with her family. Her father, Andy, is hoping for a promotion at his job, however the pressure begins to heavily affect him and he begins to behave increasingly erratically, which Judith films until eventually Andy takes over. So from here on out, Andy is actually the cameraman rather than Judith, and he attempts to expose the rest of the family's dark secrets and presents them to the family after he went through all of their personal belongings whilst his wife was at work and his children were at school, completely invading their privacy as a result. This may well be the most convincing and authentic found footage film I have ever seen. The acting feels so natural and authentic, and I genuinely believe what I'm seeing is real. This of course just makes the film all the more unsettling, as Andy's mental deterioration only gets worse and worse throughout the film. Unfortunately, I am going to have to spoil this one in order to properly explain the disturbing aspect of this film. So if this one has interested you, then just feel free to skip ahead, okay? Ready? So at the end of the film, Andy is about to commit when Judith walks in, and upon finding him, she hugs him, but in response, he strangles her in an extremely long and uncomfortable scene. This just feels far too realistic, and it's incredibly hard to watch. You see Judith really struggling, and Andy is just crying, and it's horrible. He then proceeds to kill his son Joe and his wife Sheila after she discovers Andy with the bodies. This is probably the best found footage film I've ever seen in terms of realism, and the ending is just so sure to stick with you for a very long time, as it truly is just unforgettable. Apparently, this film is completely unscripted, which is probably what makes the acting feel so fluid and realistic, as well as it being entirely shot in just 18 days. As much as I love found footage, it really is just such a hard subgenre of horror to master and make believable, but Exhibit A feels like watching a real home video that you've just stumbled across on an old camera you found hiding in the attic, you know? There really wasn't a single character in this film that felt fake to me, but you guys will have to let me know what you think. Benny's video. Sorry if the lighting or angle changed, I had to go up and do something and then I came back, so hopefully it's all okay. Anyways, Benny's Video is a horror film about a young boy named Benny who finds a fascination with repeatedly watching the same video that he had shot, which entails a pig being shot in the head. This film is directed by Michael Haneke, and in this film we are, as a viewer, forced to sit through this video of a pig being multiple times, with the film even opening with it, which is enough to put anyone off. And honestly, the first time that I watched this film, I almost immediately turned it off because of this. As a result of his fascination with the shocking video, he aspires to make something even more horrific and daring, and so he manages to invite a girl of a similar age over to his house and makes her watch the violent video before shooting her and recording him. The rest of the film entails Benny and his family trying to cover up his that he has committed, and he's pretty quick to reveal the video as well as the body of the girl to his family, which they decide to this clean the apartment, try and hide any evidence, this horrific crime that he's just committed. The film is really bleak, and the strange thing about it is that although Benny committed such a horrible crime, he remains pretty normal and collected throughout the film, which makes the atmosphere very realistic because there's no crazy over-the-top moments or anything, as the film favours its dark realism over any extreme gore or moments of elevated drama. Instead, horror lies within the fear of the rising technology in the 80s, as well as the development of video culture and the fears that some people had surrounding it, which is perfectly reflected through Benny, as he appears to be completely dissociated from reality as a result of his addiction to extreme media, to the point that he murdered a completely innocent young girl. This film has actually become even more relevant as time has gone on, as desensitization to violent media is only increasing, especially for young people, as I'm sure that many of us see violent videos online when we're scrolling, and what used to be considered shocking is now just seen as normal. Another disturbing element of this film that I have to mention is that the violent video of the pig that Benny rewatches throughout the film appears to be a video of a real slaughter, which, whilst I'd hope that this is filmed at the slaughterhouse for the purpose of food and not just for the film, it's still incredibly shocking and upsetting, as the video is of course just quite graphic, so just keep that in mind if you're thinking of checking this one out. I have to say that I actually found this one to be pretty boring. I'm sorry, please don't come for me, but this film really just wasn't for me, unfortunately. It definitely made me go, what the fuck? Couple times, but after the initial suspense has worn off, I just found that the rest of the film and the runtime was just a slog, to be honest. I'm sorry, okay, I'm sorry. It's okay if you like this film, but yeah, just not for me. Dancer in the Dark. Lars von Trier is back at it again. Look, this entry may not be quite as visually disturbing or violent as the house that Jack built, but it still deserves a place on this list nonetheless because it is so emotionally traumatizing. Dancer in the Dark is a musical starring Björk as Selma, who is the film's main protagonist. Selma is a Czech immigrant and she works in a factory to try and make ends meet for both her and her son in rural America, and rents a trailer home that belongs to a couple named Bill and Linda. Selma's true passion is music, theatre, singing and dancing. She regularly attends a musical theatre group with the little spare time that she has. At first glance, it's hard to understand how this musical drama could be considered by so many people as such a deeply disturbing film, which is exactly what I thought as well. But do not let this film fool you, because let me tell you that it's intense, okay? It's intense. I actually watched this film for the first time in one of my uni classes, and literally only one other person turned up to the class that day, and I honestly wouldn't have stayed because the film is quite long, but I'd heard about it and I'd seen it mentioned before as like in terms of disturbing film. I was like, you know what, I'll stay. This film broke me, okay? It broke me. I was shocked, to say the least. I remember walking home that day after the film had finished, and I'm someone that has to listen to music literally whenever I go out because I'm autistic, if you didn't know, and I get overwhelmed very easily, but like I just walked home in complete silence that day, feeling completely and utterly empty. I don't cry at films like ever, and I still didn't cry at this one, but I do think that it emotionally affected me on another level. Like seriously, my heart just felt so heavy for days after watching this film. So why is this musical drama so disturbing? Well, unfortunately, I am going to have to spoil this one like pretty heavily for you in order to actually explain its disturbing elements. But I really do recommend that you watch this film first if you haven't already, so please, I urge you to skip past this part if it sounds like something you're interested in. Basically, Selma has a pretty upsetting secret. She has a degenerative eye condition, which is causing her to go blind at quite a rapid pace, and she believes her son also has this condition, and she is desperately trying to save enough money so that he can get the procedure, which will essentially fix this condition so that he won't suffer with blindness in the future like Selma. Problem is that because of Selma's condition, it becomes increasingly difficult for her to be able to work safely and efficiently at her job, and as a result, she is let go from the factory, leaving her unemployed. However, it turns out that Bill, who she is renting the trailer from, also has a secret he tells Selma about, this being that he is also struggling for money. But because his wife is unaware, she is still just happily spending as much money as she wants, and he's not telling her to stop because he doesn't want her to know that he's struggling heavily for money. This is, of course, a massive issue because money is running out and there's no money coming in for anyone. Selma admits to Bill that she is basically blind, and unfortunately this is where the film really takes a turn for the worst, as Bill decides to take advantage of this information and he pretends to leave the room when in reality he's still standing right in front of Selma as she puts her money away into what was supposed to be her secret hiding spot, her son's procedure fund, which is literally all the money she has, by the way. Once Selma discovers that the money has been taken, she of course confronts Bill, but he gives her a horrific ultimatum in which he tells her to either murder him or basically just accept that her money is now his. The really disturbing aspect of this scene is that Selma does actually end up Bill several times, but because she's blind, she just constantly either misses or shoots in non-fatal areas over and over. So in the end, she essentially has to resort to beating him to death with a safe. This whole scene is just so unexpected, it's so brutal and graphic, but this still isn't the worst part of the film, as this winds Selma up in prison, and of course no one would ever believe her story about Bill stealing her money because she was the only one that knew he was financially struggling, and she is sentenced to death. The film's ending is, to this day, one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen depicted in a film. Also just emotionally though, because of course it's nothing or anything, but basically we see Selma being hacked. She's screaming and struggling in between singing this gut-wrenchingly haunting song, and the film just ends with her being dropped down and her neck snapping. So yeah, genuinely heartbreaking, but I really do respect this film, even if it is gut-wrenching, and something that I particularly love about it is that it managed to be so utterly disturbing without actually incorporating any super shocking scenes, which, as we go further down this iceberg, you'll see that a lot of these films do just try to be as edgy as humanly possible to be shocking or disturbing. Instead, Dancer in the Dark uses its kind of anti-musical genre bending to express its utter bleakness. What makes everything so much worse is how much of a genuinely lovely human Selma is, and you just want people to stop hurting her, but it only gets worse and worse instead. This may be the most depressing movie of all time, and it is sure to haunt you, and it has such a beautiful lead performance from Bjork. It is truly one of a kind, and I'm so glad that I went into this one blind, no pun intended. Sorry, I had to. The film actually won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and Bjork won Best Film Actress. Also, to make the degenerative eye disease seem even more authentic for Selma's character, Bjork actually wore contact lenses, which were specifically made to reduce her vision, and Bjork stated that working on this film with Von Trier was such an emotionally intense experience that she straight up never wanted to act in a film ever again, which is just crazy to me. Tusk. Imagine waking up one day and you're a walrus. No? Can't imagine it? Well, luckily Tusk, directed by Kevin Smith, should answer all of your questions about what it would be like to be a human walrus. This horror film follows a podcaster named Wallace, who, to be honest, is pretty unlikable from the get-go. He hosts a podcast with his friend Teddy that is called, I have to be careful the way I say this, the Not See Party. Yeah, I'm not censoring that, it's called the Not See Party. Yeah. Where they basically just interview different eccentric people, but as you can maybe tell from the name of the podcast, they're both a bit edgelordish and arrogant. Anyways, Wallace ends up flying to Manitoba to interview someone for his podcast known as the Kill Bill Kid, who accidentally severed his leg with a katana and filmed it. But when Wallace gets to Manitoba, he discovers that this so-called Kill Bill Kid has committed So, of course, that leaves him with no one to interview. Instead, Wallace finds a flyer advertising a place to stay, as well as the promise of interesting stories. This intrigues Wallace, and he takes up this offer. Turns out that this place to stay is a mansion inhabited by an old man named Howard, who tells Wallace about a walrus that he named Mr. Tusk, who rescued him from a shipwreck. However, Howard has actually laced Wallace's tea, and then things start to get extremely weird because Howard basically Wallace's body to transform him, you guessed it, into a walrus. As you may be able to imagine, this film received pretty negative reviews, with critics calling it disgusting and pointless. Some critics even labelled it as the worst movie of all time. The entire film was actually made in just 15 days, so perhaps that could explain why it comes across so rushed, with the entirety of its $3 million budget, almost the entirety, not all of it, just being used to obtain copyright for the song Tusk by Fleetwood Mac. So yeah. Body horror is actually one of my favourite subgenres of horror though, and I do kind of love the weird freaky walrus suit in this film, but it's a shame that 99% of the film is so boring, in my opinion. There actually is one really cool scene, in my opinion though, that I do like, where Howard tries to make Wallace swim in a pool that he has, and I think this scene is actually really effective at making the viewer feel claustrophobic. Like, it does for me at least, because just seeing Wallace stuck in that horrible suit and being plunged into the water like that, basically unable to move or fight for his life, is just horrible to me. I wish that more of the movie was like that, and maybe if they hadn't blown the majority of their budget on a single song, then this film could have been way better. It could have had a lot more potential. I really don't think that this movie is trying to be as serious as some people think it is though. Like, in my opinion, it's clearly trying to be very campy and silly. I mean, just the ending alone is one of the funniest, most stupid and ridiculous endings to a film I've ever seen, because once Wallace is rescued, he is placed into a zoo for some reason, and his friends come to visit him and they give him a fish to eat, and it's just so funny to me. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Also, I'm not saying that he deserved to be turned into a walrus, but if anyone was going to get turned into a walrus, he's not the worst choice. Like, this guy is such a dick. I don't feel bad for him at all. Sorry. Yeah, definitely not as disturbing as a lot of people claim it to be, in my opinion, but it's definitely a strange one, and it will, without a doubt, make you question if you're watching. Dogville. Lars von Trier really does deserve all of the praise that he can get for creating disturbing movies, because now we have the thriller film Dogville. This really isn't my favourite Lars von Trier film, to be honest. I know that a lot of other people feel very strongly about it, so I'm aware that it's probably just my personal tastes not being met. Don't get me wrong, I can still very much appreciate this film for what it is, and it is beautifully made, that's undeniable. That being said, this film is truly Lars von Trier at his most pretentious, as the entire film is shot on stage with almost no props or set design, so it's basically like watching a stage play, except it's shot like a film, of course. The film stars Nicole Kidman, who plays the character of Grace, who joins a small community to hide from gangsters who are out to get her. However, this little community quickly begins to resemble something closer to a prison rather than a sanctuary. The setting of this film being so minimalistic is of course a metaphor that represents like how the little town is just all seeing and there is no escape. However, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this is that everyone in the town can literally see the abuse that occurs here, because there are literally no walls, and yet they actively choose to ignore it, which is of course so frustrating and upsetting to watch. These townspeople put Nicole Kidman's character through hell as they torture her both physically and sexually, and there is nothing she can do to escape. Dogville is horrific and relentless throughout, and like I said earlier, I really don't hate this film, and I think it's super innovative, even if it's not really to my taste. This one is sure to devastate you though, and of course Nicole Kidman's performance is top tier. It's heartbreaking, it's cruel, and I really struggled with knowing where to place this film on the list, because it's definitely not an easy film to recommend to people. It's pretty shocking. The use of just chalk lines to represent the town is really weird, and the film even has narration by John Hurt, who only adds to the surreal nature of the film. Lars von Trier has stated that the message of the film is, and I quote, that evil can arise from anywhere, as long as the situation is right. And I'm just gonna leave you at that because I think it sums it up pretty well. The killing of a sacred deer. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is a horror film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, which focuses on Dr. Stephen Murphy, who is a cardiovascular surgeon living with his wife and 2 children. Stephen meets a 16-year-old boy named Martin, who slowly insinuates himself into the family's lives in increasingly strange and disturbing ways. So this film actually won Best Screenplay at Cannes Film Festival, as it was praised for its mysterious and metaphorical nature, intertwined with its absurdist dark comedy dialogue throughout the film, which Yorgos Lanthimos is pretty well known for as an auteur at this point, with these comedic elements adding a deeply unsettling atmosphere to his films, which is no exception to The Killing of a Sacred Deer, as the dialogue is just so weird and unnatural, and you just never know what a character is going to say next, which makes the film totally unpredictable at every turn. Since the film does focus on a surgeon, some scenes can get pretty gruesome, as it even includes real heart surgery footage, which was of course not done exclusively for the film, but they are genuinely real operations on real patients that they got special permission to film, which makes watching these scenes all the more uncomfortable, especially if you're squeamish. Barry Keoghan as Martin in this film is absolutely phenomenal, and he is so creepy in this, especially once he reveals his true intentions to Stephen, as he explains that because his father died while Stephen was operating on him, his family is now essentially cursed and will die in just a few days to paralysis, the inability to eat and bleeding from the eyes, unless Stephen kills a member of his own family. From this moment onwards, Stephen's family, including his 2 young children, begin to suffer from these exact circumstances. This film is crazy, confusing at times, and it's funny, and at other times it's truly terrifying. A very typical Yorgos Lanthimos film, if you ask me, very disturbing, but still fairly digestible. Funny Games. Funny Games is a thriller film directed by Michael Haneke, in which a family of 3 take a trip to Austria in a peaceful lake house to spend time together, and 2 lovely young men come to help the family feel really at home and comfortable on their relaxing holiday away, and oh boy do they play some hilariously funny games together. Okay, so maybe I lied with that a little bit, with that description a little bit. 2 young men do show up to the family's little getaway house, and they do play some games. Against their will, some may say that they are taken hostage and tortured and humiliated, but you know, it's all just fun and games. These 2 men, named Peter and Paul, make a bet that the family won't survive until 9 in the morning. The film is very unique because it's quite satirical in nature, with its dialogue and the film even breaking the 4th wall multiple times, which is super cool to be honest. This includes characters looking directly into the camera and talking to the audience. As well as this, they even straight up reference the fact that in a film, and they reference the plot development. Haneke actually stated that this isn't meant to be a horror film, although I think I'd argue that because of its tension, and not to mention just how gore heavy this film is, it just is a horror film, undeniably. I know that maybe it clearly wasn't Haneke's intention, but it's just undeniable. It just is. The film's entire goal is, you guessed it, to make the viewer uncomfortable and disturb them, as well as to question what is fiction and reality. The film actually got a remake in 2007, however, unlike most remakes, it kept the same director, set, and even props, and literally 0 changes were made to the script and shots, so it is pretty much exactly the same, which is pretty interesting. This film is super shocking, and it's bound to upset you if you don't watch a lot of more extreme side of horror. The characters straight up address the viewer, and it makes you just feel guilty, as you feel like an accomplice to the torture of this poor innocent family. But this isn't even the most unique part of the film, as at one point the mother actually manages to one of these men. However, then they reach for the TV remote and literally rewind the film to change what happens and stop her from them. Also, I know that I mentioned how gory this film is, however, there's actually very minimal on-screen gore, and it's all just mostly implied, which is pretty cool. Apparently, Haneke created the film as a critique of Hollywood's desensitization to violence. However, perhaps the message didn't quite get across to viewers, because it was estimated that 1/3 of the audience at Cannes Film Festival actually walked out because the film was so shocking. The film makes you really feel guilty and bad about this poor family, and it will have you saying, what the fuck? Quite a few times, because it is so unsettling. But that is exactly why this film was such an instant classic. It's definitely the most innovative home invasion film I've ever watched, with such an incredible screenplay, and it just overall implies our strange willingness to essentially watch a family get tortured all in the name of entertainment. Ulrich Muhe and Suzanne Lothar, I'm so sorry if I pronounced those wrong, play the husband and wife here, whilst Arno Frisch and Frank Gehring? I think that's how you pronounce it, play as Paul and Peter, and their roles just feel so natural and authentic. I personally absolutely love this film. Like, this is exactly my kind of thing. I love weird stuff like this, and this film is just so exceptionally well made. It deserves to be as well known as it is, like, without a doubt. In My Skin. In My Skin is a horror film directed by Marina Devan, which follows Esther, who is played by the director of the film. However, she has a very dark, secret addiction, with this being her own self-mutilation, which all started from a horrific injury on her leg that she began to further mutilate for her own satisfaction. Now let me say that not many films genuinely make me squirm anymore, but this one really got me. The scenes of Esther herself are so long and drawn out, and it gets to the point where she even starts to herself, and I could just not look at the screen because it's really that graphic. Like, it really is. This film is an example of the new French extremity subgenre, which is infamous for being disgusting and bleak and psychologically torturous, and this film is no exception. It gives us no explanation for Esther's motives, and instead we just follow her as she spirals further into this addiction. It is of course a body horror film as well, and we see her wounds getting more severe throughout the film, and whilst we don't have any exact reasons as to why Esther is doing this, it's pretty clear to see that she enjoys the control that she's able to have over her body in these moments, with one scene even showing her imagining that her arm is completely unattached from her body, which implies that she is just fully dissociated from her own physical body. If you're like me and you have a pretty high tolerance for watching films, then maybe give this one a watch, because it just might make you question how high your tolerance is, like me. Inside. We are back with another new French extremity film, Inside, a horror film directed by Julien Maury, which I highly suggest that you skip if you're pregnant. Trust me, because Inside is all about a very heavily pregnant woman named Sarah who is terrorized in extremely brutal ways by a terrifying, scissor-wielding woman who wants one thing and one thing only. Can you guess what it is? Sarah's baby. The entire film is basically just a gore fest, and I can't lie, I absolutely love this film. It is so bloody and relentless and weird. Like, for some reason we also get to see multiple shots of the fetus actually inside Sarah's womb, which is super strange, and I didn't expect that when I watched the film. This film is actually banned in Germany because of its extreme visceral violence and gore. And many critics criticize this film for pushing the boundaries of on-screen violence, especially because the victim is, of course, a heavily pregnant woman. It does have a great cast though, as it stars Alison Paradis, Beatrice Dalle, and Natalie Russell, who overall make this movie come together. I guess there's not much to say about this one, as it's pretty simple, but I do love it because it's just so stupidly intense. Boys Don't Cry. Boys Don't Cry is a biographical crime film directed by Kimberly Peirce, entirely based on a true story. This film is about a young transgender man named Brandon, who keeps his identity as a trans man hidden to those around him. Hilary Swank plays Brandon here, and the film is actually kind of initially framed as a romance film in which Brandon is fighting for who he is, whilst also actively hiding who he is, which is why this film's sudden 180 into violence and devastating acts of depravity is so shocking, because the beginning really tricks you into believing that this is a hopeful story about identity and love, but it just completely shatters that idea. There is this constant looming dread, as we kind of know that at some point Brandon's identity as a trans man is going to be revealed, and we're not really sure what the reaction will be or how it will go, because it almost feels as if there is hope for Brandon to be accepted for who he is. Like I said before, this film does not hold back though from the honestly horrific reality that plays out. Despite this film's implications of Brandon exploring his identity in perhaps a more positive way, initially it just evolves into brutal elements, and this film is somewhat balanced out because of, you know, having both like super brutal elements and then like hopeful stuff, but in the end it is horrific no matter what. Like, there's no other way to say it, especially when we consider that this was a real story, and I think for that reason the depiction of the violence is perhaps necessary to get the point across. Every single day, people are targeted for simply existing, and the consequences are beyond upsetting, they are traumatizing, they are life-changing, and this film doesn't shy away from that fact. No, it does not. The in this film is some of the most harrowing I've ever seen in a film, especially because, like, remember what I said, it has big actors. Like, I've already mentioned Hilary Swank, but Chloe Sevigny also stars as Brandon's love interest in this film, and their relationship is very tender and hopeful, only to completely crush any hope you ever had. And yeah, like I mentioned before, you can kind of just sense that something awful is brewing throughout the film. It's strange, because other than this particularly horrific scene towards the end, the rest of the film is quite approachable and accessible, unlike some other films that will appear on this list the deeper we go. But I think emotionally that is worse for me, because you have a real connection to the characters in this film, especially Brandon, of course. It is a shocking film, more than anything. Yeah, and it can be a little uncomfortable at times, and it just has some dark elements, but above all, it is just shocking, and I think that's the point. The ending to this film is traumatizing, and I am going to spoil it, unfortunately, but basically, Brandon is ganged and murdered by his male acquaintances, which is exactly what happened in real life. Yeah. Now, of course, being made in 1999, this film does have some issues, such as the fact that they of course casted a cisgender woman to play a transgender man, and I do agree that they definitely should have cast a transgender man to play Brandon, and I really do believe and hope that if this film was made now, then they would have. That being said, Hilary Swank did actually win the Best Actress Oscar for this film, and I do think that her performance was phenomenal, but yeah, I do wish that they could have cast a trans man for this role. This film has definitely garnered some more attention in recent years because of its graphic scenes, and it was actually given an NC-17 rating, and they actually talk about this in the documentary This Film Is Not Yet Rated, which is a really interesting look into how films get their age ratings. They do discuss Boys Don't Cry in that documentary, however, I kind of think the NC-17 rating is pretty fair if I'm being honest. Like, if I'm remembering correctly, I think in the documentary they say something like, the film was only given that rating because of the queer sex scenes, but like, they completely fail to mention the fact that there is a horrific act of SA that is pretty graphically shown in the film. If the film really was mainly given the NC-17 rating for the queer sex scenes, then of course that is completely absurd, and they have every right to speak out about that. And I'm very sure, and I know that that does happen very frequently with films. However, this film is just undeniably disturbing to watch, in my opinion. Before filming, Kimberly Peirce actually insisted that Hilary Swank live as a man for 4 weeks, so she cut and dyed her hair, bound her chest, and tried to adapt her voice and physical movements to appear more masculine. Hilary Swank's husband said that he barely recognised her, and her neighbours even thought and straight up believed that some random man had just been coming in and out of her house. Boys Don't Cry did take some creative liberties with its narrative though, as the ending depicts Brandon dying next to his girlfriend Lana. However, in the real story, he actually died completely alone, which is really sad. It's so upsetting. And not only this, but the real life Lana actually sued the filmmakers because in reality, she was not accepting of Brandon whatsoever, like she's portrayed in the film. Like, no, she did not accept Brandon when she discovered his true identity. Despite this film's relatively small budget of just $2 million, it was very successful upon release and still proves to be successful even now. I first watched this film with my boyfriend a few years ago now, not having any idea about how graphic it gets, and we were both completely traumatized. Like, this one is just such a hard watch. Ma Mère. Oh dear, it's another French film. Except this one's actually a romance film. Although it's not exactly your typical romance film. This film, directed by Christophe Hanot, I think I'm pronouncing that right, features a 17-year-old boy, Pierre, who begins to form a romantic and sexual relationship with his mother. Yeah, Isabelle Huppert plays the mother, Are we surprised? No? Okay. And this film, yeah, people didn't like it. It definitely gives New French Extremity vibes, and Isabelle Hupper's performance is pretty solid, but that's it, really. That's all I can say, really. No, it's deeply pretentious. I don't know or see any point to it personally, as it does just kind of feel like shock for shock's sake. It of course received an NC-17 rating because it contains highly graphic sex activity between a biologically related mother and son. I really don't know what else to say about this film except it's not really very interesting. Is it disturbing? Yes, yeah, obviously, but there's really not a lot to it other than the obvious. Fat Girl. Oh, yay! Another French film! Fat Girl is a drama directed by Catherine Breillat. Breillat. I don't know how you say the last name. It's about two sisters who go on a family holiday. The sisters are 12-year-old Anise and 15-year-old Elena, who are basically polar opposites to each other. Whilst on holiday, Elena meets an older man named Fernando, and she brings him back to her and her sister's shared hotel room multiple times to have sex with him. Anise watches Elena as she has these encounters in which Fernando persistently pressures Elena and essays her in long, uncut scenes where we see everything. The film is really bad at this point, but then the film also decides to throw in a little shock ending, because why not, apparently? We already think that things are bad, of course, but then suddenly, completely out of nowhere, spoiler warning, like big spoiler warning, the family is driving home, a man smashes the windshield of their car with an axe, brutally Elena, strangles the mother, then takes Anise into the woods and violently essays her. Yes, this is also completely uncut. Anise Raybeau, I think that's how you say it, who plays a character of Anise, same name, yeah, was an unprofessional actor, which only makes her feel so much more authentic, and it makes it so much more uncomfortable to watch, and of course the entire thing is just super controversial because of the question of ethics surrounding these child actors, but especially Anise. But regardless of this, the film did win an award at the Berlin International Film Festival, as well as at Cannes Film Festival. The film was, however, banned in the Canadian province of Ontario because of its controversial nature and its explicit scenes, with one man even being detained for trying to import the movie. And in the UK, the final scenes were actually just removed from home video and DVD releases because they are too extreme. As Anise was an unprofessional actress, the director and her mother actually had to lie and tell her that her dog had died in order to get her to cry for some scenes. I'm sorry for laughing. I don't know why I find that funny. And in a scene in which Anise is slapped in the face by her mother, the slap is actually real. This is a dark coming-of-age story that focuses on sexuality, sibling rivalry, coercion, and grooming that is truly like no other. Okay, that is all of the films from tier 1 and 2 that we are discussing today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and next time we are looking at tiers 3 and 4. There are a lot of films to talk about, and they are only going to get darker than this. Like, you know, remember this is still surface level, and it's already pretty dark. So we still have quite a few tiers to go, so please do stick around and maybe consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video, and comment below. Tell me, have you seen any of these films? Do you like any of these films? Do you hate any of these films? Did any of these traumatize you? Let me know. And I'll see you guys in part 2. Okay, bye!